So teach us to number our days, that we may apply our hearts unto wisdom. Do you number your days?
And if there is anything that has more of my heart, more of my passion, more of my affections, it is glorified above him.
The more you love God, the more you hate those things that dishonor him.
All these little choices of the bad rather than the good, they are steps on the path to hell.
Hello, and welcome to How to Walk Like a Giant. I'm Jonathan, and today I wanted to talk about Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He was a German pastor during the Nazi regime and one of the few who openly resisted them when they were in power. He called out corruption and actually joined the resistance group and conspired to assassinate Hitler. He wasn't just some guy behind a pulpit. He risked his life and lived out what he preached about sacrifice and justice. He coined the term costly grace, essentially meaning that real faith costs something and it takes real sacrifice. He often compared it to cheap grace, which he described as that comfortable, convenient faith which asks nothing of us. Reading up on a story which is so refreshing, and I was in awe of what he did and how he stood up for the truth. As usual, I'll give a brief overview of his life, highlight those key moments, and along the way share my key takeaways I had from my notes and studying up on him. So sit back, listen up, and let's dive in. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was born on February 4th, 1906 in Breslau, Germany. Today that's known as Warklaw, Poland, and he was born into a prominent intellectual family. The Bonhoeffers were well respected in German society. His father Karl was a renowned psychiatrist and neurologist, and his mother Paula came from an accomplished family with a strong commitment to education and culture. Though they were Christian, the Bonhoeffers were not overtly religious, and the children were raised with values centered on integrity, respect, and intellectual rigor more than church doctrine. From a young age, Dietrich was different from his siblings. He was deeply introspective and took spiritual matters seriously. By the age of 14, Dietrich shocked his family by announcing his intention to become a theologian. His family, while supportive, questioned his decision as they thought he might pursue something more practical or more prestigious given his sharp intellect and family's influence. One of his older brothers argued that theology was not a respectable career, but Dietrich was adamant. He defended his decision, telling his family, quote, "If the church is really what it claims to be, then it must be worth investing one's life in it," end quote. And so when he was 17, Dietrich began his theological studies at Tübingen University before moving to Berlin University, where he studied under prominent theologians of the time. He was a brilliant student known for a sharp mind and original thinking. By the age of 21, Bonhoeffer had completed his doctorate with a thesis titled The Communion of Saints, a work that explored the nature of the church as a community bound together by Christ. His theological writings reflected his belief that Christianity could not be lived in isolation. It required community. He emphasized the importance of the church not just as an institution, but as a living, breathing community responsible for caring for one another. When he was 24, Bonhoeffer accepted a one-year teaching fellowship at Union Theological Seminary in New York. Initially, Bonhoeffer approached his studies at this seminary with a certain skepticism. He found the American theological approach somewhat lacking in depth compared to the rigorous academic environment of Germany. He was unimpressed by what he saw as a superficial spirituality where religious practice seemed to center on social issues rather than deep theological inquiry. However, he would be in for a bit of a surprise, and his theology, particularly his sense of social justice, would be profoundly shaped by this experience. One of the most significant influences during his time in New York was his relationship with Frank Fisher, an African-American pastor and friend who introduced him to the Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem. This church was located in Harlem's vibrant Black community, and it really exposed Bonhoeffer to a style of worship and community engagement he had never experienced before. Witnessing firsthand the struggles of the Black community in Harlem made Bonhoeffer acutely aware of the social and racial injustices in America. He was impacted by the systemic oppression and discrimination faced by African Americans. He later said that he felt the African American church in Harlem had more authentic Christianity than many of the churches he had seen, as they worshipped with a sense of urgency and hope amid suffering. This experience changed Bonhoeffer's perspective on the role of the church in society. He began to see that the church could not remain passive in the face of social injustices. Instead, it needed to be a voice for change, advocating for those who were oppressed. This idea became central to Bonhoeffer's theology, and he would carry this sense of social responsibility back to Germany, where it later fueled his resistance to the Nazi regime. In addition to his experiences at Abyssinian Baptist Church, Bonhoeffer's exposure to the social gospel movement in the U.S. broadened his understanding of Christian ethics and discipleship. He encountered theologians and pastors who believed in a Christianity that actively engaged with social issues like poverty, labor rights, and racial inequality. While he remained critical of certain aspects of American theology, Bonhoeffer found the idea of faith in action compelling, and he began to integrate these ideas into his own understanding of what it meant to follow Christ. Overall, Bonhoeffer's time in the U.S. expanded his theological framework and strengthened his belief that the church must confront social injustices with courage and action. He would return to Germany with a deeper conviction that faith must be lived out in service to others and that following Christ could require significant personal sacrifice. When Bonhoeffer returned to Germany in 1931, Hitler was rapidly gaining power. By 1933, Hitler had become chancellor, and the Nazi regime began enforcing anti-Semitic laws and requiring the church's loyalty to the state. Many Christian leaders accepted the new regime. The German Christian movement, a group within the Protestant church, aligned itself with Nazi ideology and sought to create a Nazified version of Christianity that rejected Jewish elements from the Bible and promoted Aryan supremacy. Bonhoeffer was one of the few church leaders to oppose these changes from the start. He saw the danger of aligning the church with political power and believed that faith should be loyal to Christ above all. In 1933, Bonhoeffer delivered a radio address warning about the dangers of, quote, leadership that placed itself above moral accountability. The Nazis cut off his broadcast mid-speech, a stark sign of the growing intolerance for dissent. In response to the Nazi takeover of the church, Bonhoeffer, with other theologians, helped found the Confessing Church in 1934. The Confessing Church rejected the state-controlled German Christian movement and declared that their allegiance was to God, not to Hitler. This was a bold move as it placed Bonhoeffer and his colleagues in direct opposition to the Nazi regime. The Confessing Church drafted a document called the Barmen Declaration, which asserted that Jesus Christ is the sole authority over the church. The declaration rejected any ideology or leader that sought to usurp this role. This directly criticized Hitler's demand for loyalty. Bonhoeffer's involvement in the Confessing Church marked his first public stand against the Nazis and set the stage for his future resistance. In 1935, Bonhoeffer was invited to lead an underground seminary for the Confessing Church pastors in Finkenwald, a remote area in Germany. There, he trained young pastors to serve under the Confessing Church, teaching them to resist Nazi propaganda and to ground their ministry in Christ's teachings. The Gestapo eventually closed down the seminary in 1937, and many of Bonhoeffer's students were arrested. However, the training and encouragement they received at Finkenwald prepared them to stand firm in their faith. In 1939, Dietrich Bonhoeffer faced a critical decision as he struggled with the increasing danger in Nazi Germany and the threat of impending war. With the Nazi regime growing more oppressive and his own safety becoming increasingly precarious, some of Bonhoeffer's friends and colleagues urged him to leave Germany for his own protection. He eventually accepted an invitation to return to the States to take a teaching position at Union Theological Seminary in New York. Many of his friends in the U.S. encouraged him to stay in America, where he could work and speak freely about the atrocities occurring in Germany. They hoped that Bonhoeffer's intellectual and moral conviction could be used to rally support against the Nazi regime from abroad, and that he can find safety and purpose in the U.S. However, Bonhoeffer's time in America was marked by deep inner turmoil and conviction. He quickly began to feel an intense sense of unease about staying in the States, while his country faced profound moral and spiritual challenges. After just a few weeks, Bonhoeffer felt he could not, in good conscience, remain safe in America, while his fellow Germans were struggling under Nazi oppression. In a letter, he expressed his growing discomfort, writing, quote, "I have come to a conclusion that I have made a mistake in coming to America. I must live through this difficult period of our national history with the Christian people of Germany," end quote. Bonhoeffer believed that, as a pastor and theologian, he had a responsibility to stand with the German church during its time of crisis. He felt called to minister to his people, even if it meant putting himself in harm's way. His sense of solidarity with the confessing church, which had taken a stand against Hitler's control of the church, was too strong for him to ignore. Bonhoeffer knew that if he stayed in America, he would be safe, but spiritually disconnected from the suffering and moral struggle facing Germany. To him, following Christ meant embracing the cross and enduring suffering, even when it was difficult or dangerous. He later wrote in his book, The Cost of Discipleship, about the concept of costly grace, and it was this idea that true discipleship and faith demands sacrifice and commitment. This conviction made it impossible for him to remain safely in the States while his faith and country were being tested back home. He felt this overwhelming urge that he had to live out his beliefs fully, and in order to do that, he needed to be in Germany, risking his life alongside those who shared his convictions. And so, despite the assurances of safety and opportunity to influence from afar, Bonhoeffer decided to return to Germany in July 1939. He boarded the last passenger ship to cross the Atlantic before the outbreak of World War II, which marked a turning point in his life and a testament to his courage and commitment. As I was reading this, I was just kind of shocked how he was willing to trade away the security, the safety, and the comfort for a deep calling to stand shoulder to shoulder with those back home. I think in a day and age where we're fighting to be comfortable, it's hard to imagine someone choosing something completely opposite to that idea. It made me wonder what I might be choosing on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis in order to be comfortable. I think we can really ask ourselves, are we willing to pay the price for our beliefs? This is going to look different for everyone, but whether it's standing up for what's right at work, sacrificing our time, or even just stepping outside our comfort zones, I think it's important to remember that true faith isn't about convenience. Okay, let's continue with Dietrich's story. Upon his return to Germany, he joined the German resistance movement and deepened his involvement to secretly overthrow Hitler. In this role, Bonhoeffer used his contacts to help Jews escape from Germany, risking his own life to protect others. The conspiracy group also began plotting to assassinate Hitler. This was a morally complex decision for Bonhoeffer, who had always been committed to nonviolence and was opposed to any form of violent resistance. However, as he witnessed the atrocities of the Nazi regime, particularly the persecution and murder of Jews, he came to believe that the circumstances demanded a different kind of response. Bonhoeffer shared his moral struggle on this issue. He really centered it on what he saw as a choice between two evils. He viewed the Nazis' actions as a profound assault on human dignity and believed that doing nothing would make him complicit in their crimes. He felt that the church's silence and passivity allowed the Nazis to continue their horrific abuses unchecked. Reflecting on his faith, he wrestled with the dilemma of whether he could stand by in good conscience while innocent lives were destroyed. He wrote about the Christian responsibility to act, saying, quote, "Silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act," end quote. Bonhoeffer also believed that God's grace and forgiveness were sufficient to cover the sins committed out of moral necessity. He trusted that God understood the complexity of human decisions in a fallen world and that his actions, though morally ambiguous, were guided by a sincere desire to prevent further suffering. In this sense, Bonhoeffer placed his faith in God's mercy, believing that God would judge his actions based on the intentions of his heart and his commitment to justice. I really appreciated how Dietrich shared his thought process on this matter. The way he made this tough ethical decision based on theology really opened my eyes to see how the Bible can speak to all circumstances. I think it's easy to make a quick decision which you're somehow able to justify and rationalize later on, and that's probably the tendency today. But placing emphasis on your own morals first and basing your decision around that takes intentional effort, especially when the world is trying to tell you something which is completely opposed to that. In April 1943, the Gestapo discovered Bonhoeffer's involvement in the resistance, and he was arrested. He spent the next 2 years in various prisons, including the notorious Tegel military prison in Berlin. Bonhoeffer's time in the prison began with isolation and uncertainty, very typical of political prisoners. He initially found prison life physically and mentally taxing. The lack of freedom, the poor conditions, and the knowledge that his future was very uncertain weighed heavily on him. Yet he soon settled into a rhythm of prayer, writing, and spiritual reflection that sustained him throughout his imprisonment. Bonhoeffer's correspondence with his family and friends became his lifeline, especially his letters to his parents and his fiancée Maria. His letters reveal a warmth and gentleness, a testament to his ability to find beauty and connection even in the bleakest surroundings. His family smuggled books and writing materials to him, allowing him to study, reflect, and compose theological insights. One of the most consistent aspects of Bonhoeffer's letters is his refusal to dwell on his own suffering. Instead, he showed great concern for his family's well-being and the people he ministered to within the prison walls. Bonhoeffer became something of a pastor to the prisoners, offering spiritual support and comfort to his fellow inmates, both civilians and soldiers alike. Known for his calm demeanor and wisdom, he would lead prayers, engage in theological discussions, and offer a listening ear to those who were suffering. His presence became a source of strength to many as he encouraged them to remain hopeful despite the horrors they faced. Bonhoeffer also befriended several prison guards, some of whom, moved by his character, helped him communicate with the outside world. Through these guards, he was able to smuggle letters and writings that would be later compiled into, quote, letters and papers from prison. This collection of writings offers profound insights into Bonhoeffer's mind and soul during his final years. His reflections from prison address questions about faith, suffering, and the presence of God in dark times. This whole period in Dietrich's life was a reminder for me that no matter what we're going through, we can find peace by trusting in God's presence and purpose. The moment Dietrich left that boat back to Germany was the day he mentally prepared himself for this possibility, that he might end up suffering for his actions. However, God gave him the grace to carry through it. In 1944, after a failed assassination attempt on Hitler, which was the July 20th plot, the Gestapo intensified their crackdown on the conspirators. Bonhoeffer was transferred to various concentration camps, ultimately arriving at Flossenburg. On April 9, 1945, just weeks before the Allies liberated Germany, Bonhoeffer was executed by hanging. Witnesses to his final moments described Bonhoeffer as calm, composed, and resolute, praying before he was led to his death. A camp doctor who witnessed the execution later wrote, quote, "In the almost 50 years that I worked as a doctor, I have hardly ever seen a man die so entirely submissively." And there we have it. That's Dietrich Bonhoeffer. His life is a roadmap for living a faith that's bold, engaged, and sacrificial. He really challenges us to stop playing it safe, to put our faith into action, and to make our lives count for something bigger than ourselves. Following Jesus isn't easy. It definitely wasn't for Bonhoeffer, and it won't be for us, but it's worth every bit of the cost. I hope this episode encouraged you and helped you reflect on your own life. Don't forget to follow this podcast if you haven't already and share it with others. I'll see you in the next one. Go in peace.
So teach us to number our days, that we may apply our hearts unto wisdom. Do you number your days?
And if there is anything that has more of my heart, more of my passion, more of my affections, it is glorified above him.
The more you love God, the more you hate those things that dishonor him.
All these little choices of the bad rather than the good, they are steps on the path to hell.